Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Samantha Hill, and I'm the curator of civic engagement here at the Kislak Center. And welcome to the Post-Custodial, Post-Colonial Collecting panel discussion. So the goal of this panel is to explore the ethical considerations in post-custodial collecting. But before we discuss those considerations, let's first define the term post-custodial. In the article, To Suddenly Discover Yourself Existing, Uncovering the Impact of Community Archives by Michelle Caswell, Makira Sisfer, and Mario H. Ramirez, they describe the post-custodial model as borrowing records from individuals, families, organizations, and repositories to digitize and describe them using culturally appropriate references. The physical materials remain with the owners, and the digitized assets are curated within a database to make it freely accessible online. But if you think about this post-custodial model that many academic institutions are participating in currently, we should also think about post-custodialism as a form of storytelling that allows communities to contribute to their own self-representation and stewardship through independent projects, as well as collaborations and partnerships with academic institutions. So the best way for us to kind of dive into this topic is to first see examples of projects which have overlapping similarities, but also are uniquely different and within their own. And through exploring these different topics and these different projects, we can have a more well-rounded view of post-custodialism as well as post-colonial collecting in order to talk about these ethical considerations and what are the best practices in doing this work, and what are the questions that we have for ourselves as we do it, so that we can not only represent many communities like with equity, but also to do this in the most humbling and as well as amazingly ethical possible. Sorry about that. So first, I would like to start with our first presentation. We have four today. Our first one is the Grupo de Apoyo Mutuo Historical Archive, facilitated by Carlos Juárez and Brie Gettleson. Sorry about that. So the Grupo de Apoyo Mutuo Historical Archive is an effort to rescue and provide access to millions of documents which contain testimonials from, that contain testimonials from victims of human rights violations during the Guatemalan internal armed conflict in 1960 to 1996. One collection within the archive is now digitized. This is the disappearance collection, developed through partnerships through GAM, which is Grupo de Apoyo Mutuo, and Harvard College. Basically, this presentation what we're going to give it to is Carlos Juárez, who's a lawyer with Grupo with GAM, with a degree from the University of San Carlos de Guatemala. He has led cases enforcing the disappearance of Guatemala at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And he is a coordinator of GAM Historical Archive, a project based in collaboration between the German Society of International Cooperation, Harvard College, and GAM. Also, we have Brie Gettleson. She is the Latin American Studies Librarian at Penn Libraries. Prior to this role, she was the Social Science Librarian at Harvard College, where she served as the subject specialist and research support member for GAM Digital Archive team. She's drawing on her prior knowledge and experiences in Guatemala. She directs undergrad research projects related to GAM archive and has traveled with students to work directly with GAM in Guatemala City. Please welcome Carlos Juárez and Brie Gettleson.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Samantha. I just want to start by thanking Samantha and Lynn Farrington and everyone at Kislak and the Wolf Humanities Center for bringing us together today. This has been a really fantastic day, and the evening event last night as well has really been great. So I'm hoping and assuming that you can see my screen with our slide deck. So thank you everyone for being here today to join us. My friend and colleague Carlos Juárez and I will be presenting together about the Grupo de Apoyo Mutuo, or GOM, Historical Archive project. It was important for us to present together because this is a collaborative, reciprocal relationship-based project. And so it was really important for us, the two of us, to be here together to present on our work. And we are two of only many people, only two of many people who are a part of the project team. So we're representing many more people by being here today. Before I turn things over to there we go, to Carlos, this is a very brief outline of what we're going to cover in our presentation today. Carlos is going to share with us information about the Grupo de Apoyo Mutuo, its history, the development of the GOM Historical Archive, and then we'll both talk a little bit about the collaboration process for the digitization, the impacts of the archive the impacts it has had since its formation, and touch lightly on some future potential future collaborations that we would invite anyone who is interested to get in touch about. So now it is my great pleasure to turn things over to Carlos.
Thank you, Brie, and thank you, everybody. I want to thank you all for making me a part of this great event. Hopefully, I will be able to speak in representation of the mutual support group in Guatemala, el Grupo de Apoyo Mutuo. And to start, I want to say that the Grupo de Apoyo Mutuo, it's an organization that was founded by women on June 4th of 1984, and it established during the internal armed conflict. And I always say, when I speak about the organization, I always have to recognize that the mutual support group wouldn't be able to be an organization, a public organization, without the courage of brave women that had the courage to go out and to the streets and ask for justice for the disappeared people that were happening on Guatemala. So this group was formed by mothers, wives, sisters, and friends of the disappeared people, and they were the only ones that got this courage to be able to ask for justice in Guatemala during the last military government that we had. And what happened with these ladies was that they were took from their ordinary life, and they had to become activists, lawyers, journalists, prosecutors, asking for justice for everyone. When GAM got out at the streets, at the beginning they were only seven women, but when people start to hear about the group, and immediately they start to recruiting more people at the organization. And for the first year, they already had 200 families in the organization, and that was just a proof of what disappearances were taking place in Guatemala. So what they become was what they did was ask for justice, and I have to say that almost 40 years later, they are the heroes of justice. Right now in Guatemala, we have been able to improve some of the cases against perpetrators, and that is a huge step for Guatemala. And now they are the pioneers in this legacy of defending and promoting human rights in Guatemala. So wanted to recognize and to say in a really, really short time, what is the GAM? And I would like to be able to go to the other slide, Brie, if you can help me. To speak about the GAM Historical Archive, what happened was that these ladies were able to record the testimonies of people that suffered the violence in the internal armed conflict, but not only the violence from the state, but the violence from the guerrillas group. So what we have right now is that we were able to digitize 3,200 testimonies from victims. This was possible for the collaboration that we had with Haverford team, and Brie was part of this big effort. And now we have this collection digitized, and we are giving access to all the people that wants to do research on the topic of enforced disappearances. But also we are giving access to information from the public ministry, just for them to be able to keep with the research and the cases of justice. And right now we are showing this type of documents to students in Guatemala from the universities of the country, and researchers from all over the world that wants to be interested to get to know the archive. So I hope Brie can give more details, but in a short period of time, this is the archive of GAM.
All right, thank you, Carlos. I'm just going to start on the collaboration side of talking about the collaboration at Haverford College and that kind of perspective on the collaboration with the GAM. So you'll notice that the collaboration we're talking about is with Haverford College Libraries, and I am an employee of University of Pennsylvania Libraries, but I was at Haverford College up until August of this year. And even though I am now at Penn Libraries, I still consider myself a part of the project partnership and carry like a sense of obligation to stay involved in the project because it's really meaningful and important to me in a way that transcends kind of the location of my present employment. And also, as we'll touch on briefly at the end of the presentation, I'm really hopeful that the Penn Libraries can also become a part of the partnership with the Grupo de Apoyo Mutuo in potentially being involved in other archival areas. So here on this slide, my other screen's over here, so I'm looking over here. Here on this slide, you can see some of the kind of key moments in the timeline of the project, which we're sharing to demonstrate both kind of the long-term nature of the work and also the kind of the necessity of the reciprocity of site visits and the kind of sharing of opportunities for travel and collaboration, attending of workshops, conference presentations, and kind of sharing those opportunities between project partners, both within the two kind of institutions or organizations, and then also among the group, so that everyone has kind of opportunities for travel and collaboration through the project. Because it's really, if there's one thing to really take away, I think, about many post-custodial archival projects, it's about the relationships involved in the projects in addition to the materials. On Haverford's end, the project was developed and supported by a postdoctoral fellow, Alex Galarza, two digital scholarship librarians. One of them, Andy Janko, was the technical lead who built the digital archive that the materials are stored in. And then perhaps most significantly, a cohort of bilingual undergraduate students who carried out much of the description and transcription work. Since Haverford College is an undergraduate institution, a lot of the technical and research support in getting the archive going was actually supported by undergraduate students who are also some of the first researchers to use the material for their own research projects. For the Haverford College Libraries, this project has meant a rare opportunity for a small liberal arts college to develop and maintain a unique collection of research materials in an ethical partnership. And while there certainly is precedent for post-custodial archives created in academic institutions in partnerships with communities or organizations, one of the things that we learned early on, which has been reinforced along the way, comes back to what I just said, which is it's really about the relationship and the partnership as much as it is about the actual materials in archives. Many of the original Haverford project team members are now at other institutions, including students who graduate, but some of us, like me, are actively interested in maintaining this relationship and continuing to develop it into other opportunities. And Carlos, if you have other things to add about the collaboration from your perspective.
Yeah, for me, it is important to share with you about the ethics that we made in the relationship with Haverford, because the story about the archive is that Haverford wanted to make it public, all the collection, and we didn't think that this was something that could be helpful for the families. And I have to explain why. Some of the testimonies point to the perpetrators, and most of the families in the interior of Guatemala keep living with the perpetrators in their communities. And this is because military forces recruit civilian people just to perpetrate some of these human rights violations, and most of them are keep living with the victims. And some of the testimonies are pointing to the responsibilities from people that is living with them today. So it will be dangerous for us to make everything public, because that will put in danger the lives of the people that is still looking for justice. But can you imagine perpetrators knowing that people are pointing them for the responsibilities that they had in the human rights violations that took place during the internal armed conflict? So it was a central part from the relationship that Haverford was agreed to not make everything public, just for the security of the families. And I think that that is a great experience of collaboration, but respecting the ethics in every moment. I just wanted to share that because we are still proud of what we have done. And I think that it wouldn't be possible if the two institutions wouldn't be agree of doing what we did. About impacts in Guatemala and beyond, at this point, I would like to say that these are some of the things that I think that are big opportunities for Guatemala. For example, public ministry gains access to information to enhance human rights cases. And this is because, for example, public records are still difficult to get access. The main public record that was the principal resource of investigation from the public ministry is the National Police Archive. But at this moment, they are getting through hard moments, and it is possible that we are not going to have access anymore. So private collections of human rights are one of the big opportunities to get access to justice for the victims, as I am pointing in the second item, because with this information that we have, public ministry can start to give access to justice from the victims. And one of the big parts that we are centering is the dignifying the victim's historical memory. Why are we saying this? The concept of dignifying, we are talking about maintain the memory alive of the victims, because there were cases in Guatemala that not only physically the state disappeared to the victims, but at the national records. So it wouldn't be a form to say these people was disappeared because there are no proofs that they were alive. So some of the victims, the only thing that they had are these kind of documents that keep the memory of their families alive. And we are trying to give this information to young Guatemalans because most of the new generations in Guatemala don't know what happened during the internal armed conflict. So we are trying to keep the memory alive of the people, of the victims, and putting the documents in a digital platform. I think it can be a way to have um, justice for the families, because we are aware that most of the perpetrators are dying and many families are not going to have justice. But by keeping their memory alive, we are trying to dignify the memory of the victims. And the other thing is that national and international researchers gain access to a unique archival materials, because you can see what these testimonies are hard to read, but they are giving us the perspective, the perspective of the victims, and that is why it's really important for us to make this available. The only 8 cases that are public are the ones where the families gave the authorization to make it public. So we are centering the perspective of the victims in every moment.
All right, I think we're just about out of time now, but just very quickly, these are examples of the other materials in the GOM offices that have the potential to be really important collections to be potentially digitized and made available. And don't want to go over, so we will just say thank you. And here's our contact information. And we look forward to talking with all the other panelists and hearing questions in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Carlos and Brie. That was a great presentation. Next, I would like to introduce Samip Mallick, co-founder and executive director of the South Asian Digital Archive, also known as SADA. SADA is a community-based cultural change organization ensuring that South Asian Americans are included in American story, past, present, and future. For the past 13 years, SADA has documented and preserved and shared of South Asian American ensuring today's struggles for inclusion, representation, and belonging are not the same struggles for the next generation. SADA's collection of more than 4,100 items is the largest public accessible South Asian American archive, enabling academics, artists, filmmakers, journalists, students, and community members to write books, create new content, and shape public understanding about South Asian American community. SADA is on the forefront of pioneering a distributed, post-custodial, community-driven approach to archival collecting. And SADA's innovative approach has been recognized with awards from the Society of American Archivists and the American Historical Association, and grants from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the Pew Center for the Arts and Heritage, among others. Mallick's current serves the advisory board for the Library of Congress Connecting Communities Digital Initiative, and also worked as a consultant for the Ford Foundation Reclaiming Borders Narrative Initiative. Please welcome Samip Mallick.
Samantha, thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Samip. I'm the co-founder and executive director of SADA, the South Asian American Digital Archive. As Samantha mentioned, our organization is an independent nonprofit that's based here in Philadelphia, but one that works nationally to collect and share stories from the South Asian American community. And I'll share my screen. So we started SADA 13 years ago now, really recognizing that stories from our community, from the South Asian American community, weren't being systematically collected and preserved by other institutions. And fearing not only that our community stories weren't being heard, but moreover, that they were in danger of being lost entirely. I want to share a quote that perhaps many of you are familiar with from the research of Jeanette Bastien, a scholar of archival studies, but one that's really stuck with me and resonated with me over the years. Bastien talks about the impact that it has for communities to not see themselves reflected in the archival record. And here's what she says. She says, a community without its records is a community under siege, defending itself, its identity, and its version of history without a firm foundation on which to stand. Like I mentioned, we started SADA really recognizing that our community, South Asian Americans, we were a community without access to our own records. And as a result, felt like we were displaced in a country that we called our own. SADA works to collect and share stories from those in the US who trace their heritage to Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and the many South Asian diaspora communities around the world. And according to the most recent census data, there are now more than 5.4 million individuals in the US who trace their heritage to South Asia. If you do the math, you see that more than 1 in every 100 Americans traces their heritage to South Asia. And another way to think about this is that if all the South Asian Americans in the country lived in one state, it would be the 23rd largest state in the country. It would be almost as big as the state of Minnesota, bigger than South Carolina, and certainly there would be 28 smaller states than that. But I think it's important to realize and think about it that way because, of course, there are countless institutions dedicated to preserving Minnesota history and South Carolina history, but there have been no institutions other than SADA working systematically to preserve South Asian American history. And the reality is that it's only when communities that have been excluded from the archival and historical record begin to advocate for our own stories to be included that that begins to happen. And so that's the work that SADA has been doing. I wanted to share a little bit about South Asian American history with all of you today because it's a history that I think most people know very little about, including those, frankly, within the South Asian American community. It's a history that I learned nothing about growing up in Michigan. And so I wanted to take a few minutes just to share a little bit of that history with you now. South Asians began arriving and immigrating to the United States in larger numbers beginning in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And those who were coming at that time were coming primarily from the Punjab region of British India. You may know that India and now Pakistan, Bangladesh, were all British colonies until 1947 when they were partitioned. And so in those early days, late 1800s, early 1900s, it was particularly men from the Punjab region of British India who were coming to the US, and they're coming primarily to work as laborers. So they're working on farms, fields, lumber yards, mills, etc., and settling primarily on the West Coast in California, Oregon, Washington State, as well as on the western parts of Canada. There were smaller numbers of individuals who were able to come to the US for other reasons. So this, for example, is a photograph from 1914 of members of the Illinois chapter of the Hindustan Association of America. Those who are at Penn know that there's a very active South Asian Student Association on campus. This was kind of an analog association more than 100 years ago in 1914. There were very few South Asian women allowed to enter the United States in the early 1900s because of restrictive immigration policy. In fact, it was such a big deal for a South Asian woman to be allowed to enter the country that this is an article from 1915 from the San Francisco Chronicle describing the arrival of Kala Bagai, one of the very few South Asian women allowed into the US at that time. As you can see, the article is less about her and more about her nose ring. It's titled Nose Diamond, Latest Fad Arrives Here from India. But in this article, it states that Kala Bagai was the first South Asian woman in 10 years to arrive in San Francisco. The reality that these early immigrants faced was one of incredible xenophobia and hostility. This is an article from 1906, as you can see, titled Our First Invasion by Hindus and Mohammedans. And another article from 1907, titled Have We a Dusky Peril? Hindu Hordes Invading the State. It's worth noting that in this case, the term Hindu is being used as a racial classification, not as a religious classification. So now when we say the word Hindu, we typically are talking about someone of the Hindu faith. At that time, the term Hindu was being used to describe anyone who had brown skin and who was here from South Asia, whether they religiously be Hindu or Sikh, as it was primarily the case, or Muslim or even Christian. And sorry, just going back for a second, just a few months after this article was published in a town called Bellingham, Washington, there was an act of racial violence directed at South Asians who had settled and were working in the lumber yards there. A group of white men got together and violently chased out of that town the Punjabi laborers who were working in the mills. And that touched off other anti-immigrant violence in other parts of Washington State, Oregon, California, as well as in Western Canada. This xenophobia was reflected in Congress. In 1917, US Congress passed the 1917 Immigration Act, which drew a line around South Asia, parts of Southeast Asia, and barred immigration from those parts of the world to the United States. And I think it's worth noting that it was almost exactly 100 years to the day after this 1917 Immigration Act was passed that President Trump signed the first executive order Muslim ban in 2017. So it's really important to think about the ways that these histories from 100 years ago are playing out today in our country today. This all kind of culminated in the South Asian context in 1923 with a Supreme Court decision, United States v. Bhagat Singh Thind, where South Asians were barred unanimously on racial grounds from becoming American citizens because we're not white. This is an article, as you can see, from 1923, titled Hindus Too Brunette to Vote Here. In this case, brunette referring to skin color and not to hair color. And there's a photograph of a South Asian man with a caption that simply reads, quote unquote, the problem. So that gives you a sense of the ethos in this country at that time. And that was a reality here in the United States for the next, at least the next quarter century, until finally in 1946, South Asians were, after years and years of campaigning, able to become American citizens. And they raised the quota, allowing up to 100 individuals to come from the entire Indian subcontinent per year to the United States. And then it was finally only in 1965 that, with the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, that allowed my family, and I would suspect many others here from South Asia, to enter the country for the first time. The work that Sada has been doing for the last 13 years is to collect and share these stories with the public. We have materials in the archive from the late 1800s all the way up to the present day. And as Samantha said in the introduction, it's the largest publicly accessible collection of stories and materials about South Asian Americans. All those materials are made available to the public online through our website, which is sada.org, SAADA.org. And as is the theme today, what's unique about SADA's work is that SADA is a post-custodial and digital-only archive. And that's allowed us to work incredibly collaboratively with members of our community organizations, as well as with other archival institutions to digitize and provide access to historical and archival materials, but allowing the original materials to remain with whomever has them. And we've collaborated outside of the community, with institutions like Penn and Stanford and the National Archives and local and state archives as well. I wanted to highlight in particular just two initiatives of the organization, although there are many. One about how we expand the archive to ensure that stories from groups within the South Asian American community that are otherwise not reflected in dominant narratives about what it means to be South Asian American are included in SADA's work. This initiative, called the Archival Creators Fellowship Program, is one that we launched in 2019 with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And it supports fellows from groups within the South Asian American community that have been historically marginalized and silenced to share their own community stories. And it really starts with the recognition that in any group, no matter how marginalized itself, there are dynamics of power that determine who's able to share their stories, whose voices are heard, and whose voices are silenced. This project and this initiative, this fellowship, is some of the most meaningful work that I personally have been able to be part of and that I think the organization is part of. And I continue to learn so much from each of these fellows who have done incredible projects, such as reflecting the stories of Dalit community members, of queer South Asian Americans, Indo-Caribbean South Asian Americans, those who have experience of incarceration, etc. And with funding from IMLS, as Samantha mentioned, we've actually been able to expand this fellowship program this year. So in the first year in 2019, we had 3 fellows. The second year, we had 6 fellows. And this year, we had 9 fellows who just began their fellowship periods. The other initiative that I want to talk about is, I guess, the opposite of post-custodial. It's as custodial as you can get. It's a book that we published this year called Our Stories: An Introduction to South Asian America. It's a book that I'm incredibly proud of because, and one that also started from a recognition of an absence. The fact that South Asian American stories aren't reflected in classrooms, they're not included in textbooks, and they're not reflected in popular media. And so I thought I'd just take a second to read the first paragraph of the introduction to this book, because I think it really encapsulates the initiative and the drive behind this effort. It starts, quote, "As a person of South Asian heritage reading this book, you have perhaps wondered how your story fits into the American story. While South Asian American stories are rarely taught in classrooms, found in textbooks, or reflected in popular media, it is not because they do not exist. As you will soon read, our stories have existed for centuries. You're part of a community that has helped build, shape, question, challenge, and make this country what it is today. Our stories have been etched into the very landscape and character of the nation. This book, which was published in August of this year, has resonated mightily with the community. You can see photographs of some of our happy readers here, but it's out also now already in more than 1,500 schools, libraries, and homes across the country, including at Penn and Swarthmore and a number of other institutions here in Philadelphia. And as I said, it is not post-custodial, it's custodial, but it's incredibly powerful to hold in your hands this representation of your belonging. And it's something that I'd love to share with each of you. So if you get a chance to check out our website, as I said, once again, it's www.sada.org, SAADA.org, and we'd love to be connected and look forward to the questions and discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Samip. That was really great. So next, I would like to introduce Jessica Salow. She is the Assistant Archivist of Black Collections at Arizona State University Library. Prior to her current role, she was the specialist with the Community-Driven Archives Initiative, otherwise known as CDA, at Arizona State University Library. CDA initiative was a 3-year project co-developed by authentic and inclusive community-driven archive collections in Arizona. This project seeks to center the lives and the knowledge of communities of color and the LGBTQ communities by creating intergenerational and intersectional archive project led by community members and advocated for the equal ownership of archives with shared stewardship responsibilities. CDA works with communities to redefine the traditional definition and function of an archive by providing free access to archival supplies and library resources that will help communities preserve their own stories for future generations. This initiative continues to offer resources like toolkits to community members and expanding the role of newly created library collections at ASU Library. Please welcome Jessica Salow.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you so much, everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy to follow Samip and Sada because that particular collection really is important and one of the ones that CDA definitely looks up to and is very much we're very much equals in this particular work that we're doing. I will be talking about the Community-Driven Archives Initiative here at Arizona State University Library and how we center BIPOC and LGBTQ memory and knowledge. Let me try and see if I can forward this. Apologies. We always have to start off our presentations with our Indigenous land acknowledgement. This was adopted by the ASU Library within the last 2 years. And I'll just read the most important part of this is that Arizona State University's 4 campuses is located on the Salt River Valley on the ancestral territories of the indigenous peoples, including the Aqua-Altum and Peeposh Indian communities, whose care and keeping of these lands allow us to be here today. And so if you are an institution that is looking to do Indigenous land acknowledgements, we really encourage you to look at that and to acknowledge the land that you are currently sitting on. So why do we need Community-Driven Archives Initiative? Well, within here in Arizona specifically, the Latinx, Black, Asian Pacific Islander, and the LGBTQ community make up 42% of Arizona's population, but are only represented in 0 to 2% of known archival collections here in Arizona. And this was a study that was done in 2012 called the Arizona Archives Matrix Project. If you Google it, you will find the data and all of the information that is available, that was available to the archivists who performed this particular survey, and that statistic has not changed since this study done in 2012. So currently in 2021, we are still sitting at only 0 to 2% of known archival collections for these particular communities in Arizona's archives. And so this is why the initiative was really important to start, and why Nancy Godoy, who is the primary person who started this particular initiative, wanted to go ahead and do this particular work. Oops, my apologies. So the Community-Driven Archives Initiative was started in 2017 with the support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And this initiative, as Samantha says, does seek to erase the gaps that are within Arizona archives. And so with our initiative, we really tried to make sure that we came at community archiving in a different way than most institutions who are traditional archives wanted to go ahead and try and preserve history, especially of marginalized communities. And so with that, we are building strong relationships with communities and we are trying to break the cycles of injustice and fight for sovereignty. And we are trying to ensure that we are cultivating that collective memory within the community and the solidarity between BIPOC and LGBTQ communities, because a lot of those relationships are either under attack or there is some strain within them. And so we really try to make sure that we are cultivating that solidarity between groups in order to make our spaces as friendly and as inclusive as possible. We ensure that the groups that we interact with are truly able to engage at all levels of the preservation process. And that is by doing workshops, which I'll talk about here in a second, but then also imparting our archival knowledge that we as professionally trained archivists learn throughout our training in order to make sure that people can preserve their history or preserve their documents and memories in any way that they would want to go ahead and do. And all of these pictures in my presentation are actually from our events. And so these are real people, real images, real materials that we came across when we went to these events for people within the communities. And so we are also trying to center the lived experience and knowledge of these communities. And we do that by creating intergenerational and intersectional safe spaces that support the lifelong learning and reimagining of archives. And we do that by supporting the projects that members of the community would like to do. And this particular part of the work is really important and really something that we take seriously because, you know, through this type of healing and through this type of project-based, you know, acknowledgement, it really does bring a lot of emotion and a lot of like that particular trauma as a BIPOC person that is a part of everyday life that brings, it does come up and it brings a lot of that particular emotion up. And so these particular projects really do need to be supportive and try to have that healing aspect to it. And so through our safe spaces, we really hope that that is something that the community can do and that we are trying to create for them. Also, we are trying to provide access to, you know, whether that be through materials or through knowledge, as I said, by implementing programs and services that promote the equal access of stewardship, equal access of archives and shared stewardship responsibilities. And that is really, really important because you want to make sure that the community has a say in how they are documented, how they are, you know, how archives are done. And it really is important, especially within the Indigenous realm, of how to have that shared stewardship responsibility or just have them take over that particular project as well, because they are the stewards of their own knowledge and they should have the ability to have a say in how they are documented and how they are talked about within archives, just in general. So our program does provide free archival supplies to folks. We give them a box. It is a box that has, it's an acid-free box that has acid-free folders. It has different sizes of Mylar. It has the white gloves. You can actually see the white gloves on one of our people that came to that event that we gave to them in order to go through the material that they brought to that event. And then we also provide a booklet that's in English and Spanish that people can take home. So if, you know, we do provide a lot of information at our workshops. And so if there's just a lot of information going on, people are grateful for that booklet in order to take home and kind of ingest that information at their pace and at their own time. And we also support community archivists as they establish their own archival collections and repositories. We've been in partnership with a number of institutions here in Phoenix who are trying to start their own archive or need help in kind of getting that little bit of foundational work together. And we have been successful in helping 3 organizations get their materials in a state that's good for preservation and have it be available for them for future members within that organization. And so we're really proud of being able to help those institutions and those particular organizations in starting their own archive. So our workshops are, we have 2 of them. One of them, and this was prior to COVID that we were doing these particular workshops. So one of them was called the Archives and Preservation Workshop, where people came to an event where we would try to impart, a knowledge and have people become community archivists, because that's really the main goal of CDA, is to impart knowledge so that people can go out to the community and be their own community archivists. And so we would talk to people about arrangement, appraisal, describing their own materials, and then they would also receive that archive starter kit with supplies that would be needed in order to start their preservation journey on that. And this is a picture of one of the events where folks were going through some of the materials in the box, and you can see the box here off to, I believe that's the left here, where they were going through and had that, and they were able to take that home and start their own preservation journey with the materials that we provided in that workshop. We also did a scanning and oral history days where we empowered communities by introducing them to technology and digital literacy skills. We showed people how to scan and how to record oral history interviews. And in this particular picture off to the right here, this is the stations that we would set up. We would bring our own scanners and our own computers, and we would scan up to 50 items for a person if they brought their own material in. And then we would put it on a thumb drive and give them the thumb drive, and then give them a basic Excel spreadsheet for a basic metadata management. And we would start them on their digital preservation, digital learning skills. And a lot of the folks who come to our particular workshops were older folks. And so it really was important for us to teach them the digital literacy skills in order to digitize their materials and make them accessible to either their grandchildren or people who wanted to take over as the family historian or the community historian. And so this particular workshop, we're hoping to start again in 2022 because you can only really do this workshop in person. And so we're trying to move beyond the passive equity, diversity, inclusion rhetoric or just focusing on collection development. We really do measure success differently than most institutions when it comes to community archiving. We measure it by the people who attend our events, by the partnerships that we create and sustain, and that is an important part of building those relationships, is that you need to sustain those relationships to build on the good faith and goodwill that you're trying to do with communities who may not trust your institution. And we've had that happen many times here at ASU, where ASU has not the greatest reputation within these communities, because there's been many times that people who are from ASU have come into the communities and have taken stories, have taken documents, have taken different things, and have never given anything back in return. So it really is important for us to sustain those relationships with folks. And sometimes that does take years. Nancy Godoy, who has been with ASU since 2011, has for the last 10 years of her work been trying to create relationships with folks who are just now in 2021 coming online in order to trust ASU with their documents or with wanting to donate to the archive. And so it really is about sustaining. We also measure success by the people who access our library collections. And then we also measure success by how many people and organizations are able to establish their own archives. As I said earlier, we have been successful working with 3 particular organizations here, activist organizations, in making sure that their particular documents are preserved for the future. So we are creating an active space that generates the growth of community archivists. We did do some data collection at our workshops through surveys. And when we looked at and analyzed the data, it shows that 98.5% of people wanted to be included in Arizona's history, and they felt prepared to be community archivists after receiving our training. And these people actually saw the urgency to preserve their history. And so it really is important that, that this particular work is resonating with people, and that they want to be active in preserving their own memories and preserving their own materials if that's what they choose to do. We don't, as an institution here at ASU, we're not demanding that people, bring collections to us, but if they would like to start their own archive, that's great. That is the goal of a lot of community-driven archive work, is to not necessarily take in collections, but to just impart our knowledge and have people go out and do this work on their own. So community archivists are changing the way historical documents are created as they redefine what an archive is, and that should be included in there, and what should be included in the archive and who should have access. These particular pictures here are of an event that was done in 2019 with an organization called Trans Queer Pueblo, which is an organization that supports trans and queer folks here in Phoenix. And every year they do a Day of the Dead celebration, and this was the one that they did in 2019. They invited us into their space where we did some community archiving work, and we scanned some documents for people at that, and then they would place them on the altars if that's what they would want to do. And so again, it's about providing that particular service to folks to say, hey, what can we do to help you? How can we be here to support you? And through the work that we've done, we've really been able to create really great partnerships like with Trans Queer Pueblo in order to highlight their work and highlight the many community events that they do that support that healing part of our knowledge and of their community. And so within Arizona's specific archives, we have a legacy of white supremacy and settler colonialism. And some of the well-documented things within Arizona archives include Arizona history before 1912, which is when we became a state, business records, crime during territorial period, Geronimo and Indians. And I put that in quotes because the indigenous people were never able to document their own history. History all comes from white anthropologists. And so this particular well-documented thing is in quotes because it's not from the community, it's from white anthropologists. Tubestone and Wild Earp, most people know of that in Arizona. And so these are really, really some of the documented subjects that are prevalent within Arizona's archives. And we're trying to change that particular narrative through the Community-Driven Archives Initiative. So Black, Indigenous, people of color, and the LGBTQ community here in Arizona really do lack a collective memory or archive and have been dehumanized, and they are aggressively attacked by racist and homophobic legislation. I don't know if most people know about some of the legislation that did happen in Arizona. Most people might be familiar with SB 1070 that happened in 2010, 2011, where it was the Show Me Your Papers bill that allowed people to be further attacked and criminalized because they were undocumented. Sheriff Joe Arpaio was a really big talking point during that time, but also there was a House bill that came through that banned Mexican and American studies in the Tucson Unified School District. And so these particular bills and legislations really, we feel, is part of a systematic attack, and why it needs to be corrected that Arizona's archives need to include marginalized communities, because without this memory, people don't really recognize and realize that folks are having a lot of issues, and that there is a real problem with racist attacks against our communities here in Arizona. And I wanted to highlight one of the collections that we're really proud that we were able to process and get digitized. The BJ Budd Memorial Archives is the largest LGBTQ archive in Arizona. It does document the history of the community from 1970 to about 2000. And mostly it is photographs and periodicals that we have that were a part of an organization called the Valley of the Sun. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name here, but it is the Valley of the Sun something, my apologies. But it was a really great organization that went out and, did events with LGBTQ folks. And it really documented their life and the struggles that they had during that time. There's a lot of photographs within this collection that document the AIDS crisis and the AIDS quail and kind of the marches that were going on during that time about the things that were going on in the LGBTQ community at that time, specifically here in Phoenix. And it was co-established with the LGBT History Project in 2015. And so we're really proud of this collection. It is available on our PRISM digital repository here at ASU. So if you'd like to go and look at it, there's about 5,000 images available in that, and the periodicals as well will be available on our PRISM website. So if you'd like to learn more about the LGBTQ history of Arizona, this particular collection is really important and really great. And we were proud to be able to get it processed and get it digitized with the Mellon Foundation support with this initiative. And lastly, with the transition, our initiative has ended. We ended it as of July 2021. We were able to get an extension due to COVID, but through that extension, we were able to understand that, especially after the civil unrest in 2020, that ASU Library needed to do more to document the communities that surrounded us. And so with the help of the ASU LIFT initiative, which is the Listen, Invest, Facilitate, and Teach initiative, which is an initiative that our president, Dr. Michael Crow, stated that his commitment to the Black students and faculty and staff of ASU. We were number 23 on that initiative to create permanent funding for my position, which is a brand new position. This is a brand new collection at ASU, just started in August of this year. And so this is a really important next step in CDA work, is that we are creating this collection, and then we're also doing this particular work with a lot of our colleagues within the library in order to highlight a lot of the community aspects that are missing from the ways in which ASU Library shows up in the community. And so the Black collection at ASU is a really important step. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple of the things that we do have available in this collection. So the J. Eugene Grigsby Jr. Papers, Dr. Grigsby was a faculty member here at ASU in the Herberger School, and he had a large and wide interest, and he is a well-respected and world-renowned artist, Black artist. And so we do have his papers, and they will be available starting in January 2022 at our reading room. Our next step is to go ahead and get that particular archive digitized, so it is available on our PRISM digital repository. We also have the Lincoln Ragsdale audio recordings and photos from when Martin Luther King Jr. visited ASU in 1964. That is currently under our Greater Arizona collection right now, but I'm in the process of co-curating that, or bringing that under the co-curation of the Black collection at ASU. If you don't know about Lincoln Ragsdale, he is a very prominent Phoenician, Black Phoenician, who was instrumental in starting the NAACP chapter here in Phoenix. And he was very influential in this particular area where Black life and Black community is concerned. And so if you'd like to learn more about Lincoln Ragsdale, please go ahead and visit our PRISM website and our PRISM digital repository, because these recordings are available, and the pictures of Martin Luther King's visit is currently on our digital repository. We also have pictures of the Phoenix Union Colored High School, which was the George Washington Carver School, which is now the Carver Center. It was the only Black high school in Phoenix, and it closed down in the 1960s. But we do have some photographs that are available through a collection called the McCullough Family Photographs, which is also under a Greater Arizona collection that is available within the digital repository, in order to have people understand that there was a Black school and a Black life there. And Dr. Grigsby actually taught at George Washington Carver School as well. And so there really is a connection, and the richness of Black life really needs to be documented, and it needs to be told here in Arizona. And so these are some of the things that we are trying to do within community-driven archives. And finally, here is our contact information. So if you'd like to learn more, here's our website. And if you'd like to learn more about CDA, please email the community.archives@asu.edu. And if you'd like to learn more about Black collections, please contact me at my email address. I would love to speak to you about the collection that we are starting and how this initiative has really helped us in trying to reach out to marginalized communities and have this be the future. Community-driven archives is the future of archiving. And we really want people to know more about that. And we have a bunch of really great resources available to folks on our website if you would like to learn more about how we have done the work here in Arizona. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. That was really great. Next, I would like to introduce Justin Williams. He's the project archivist and manager of the Southside Home Movies Project, otherwise known as SHIMP, a community-engaged archive that collects, preserves, and digitizes researches and exhibits home movies shot by residents of the Chicago South Side. By asking owners of home movies to share their footage and describe it from personal perspective, SHIMP seeks to increase understanding of amateur filmmaking practices and of the many histories and cultures comprising Chicago's South Side. In addition, this and due to the incredible support the project's received from the community, SHIMP's work has also been recognized by national film organizations. In 2009, SHIMP received the Advocacy Award from the Association of Moving Image Archivists for raising public consciousness about the importance of archival work and access to media archives. Please welcome Justin Williams.
Thanks, Samantha. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm going to keep going forward if so. And I know we're a little tight on time, so I'm going to try to do something that will hopefully keep me on time. This is an 11-minute kind of collections reel. And so if it stops and I'm still talking, I'm going to be quiet. So thanks again for having us here today. Really the work that's been talked about by the other panelists and all day, honestly, really aligns with the ways in which we are trying to make this community-based archive and really leverage and subvert the university's kind of traditional hierarchy and structures and power relationships with community to actually serve community. So I'm just going to jump into this. We were founded, of course, by Professor Jacqueline Stewart of the Southside Home Movie Project. She is our director, and she's also a professor of cinema media studies at the university and also a born and raised Southsider. I'm joined in this work by my colleague Sabrina Craig, and also we are always immensely grateful to our interns that are supporting us. And so right now we're working with Avery and Celine to continue this work. And so for, you may have guessed by the, seeing some of the images on screen with us, and by our name, we are focused on the South Side of Chicago. We are interested in home movies, and we've been doing this since 2005. We are part of really an international movement to where archivists were interested in exhibiting the social, the historical, and the personal importance of home movies in a public fashion. And so that was most notably started in 2002 by the Center of Home Movies with Home Movie Day as an international day of celebration, but also of an international day of really democratization of preservation skills. And so at Home Movie Days, we exhibit home movies, we narrate home movies with home movie donors, but we also talk about how to care for really private collections and offer options, if useful, for donation. So in Chicago, we are actually one of three, you could say, film archives, two of which that focus on analog film. We are one of them. We focus on small gauge film, 8mm, Super 8 and 16. Chicago Film Archive started in 2003 from a donation from the Chicago Public Library. And so they have thousands of really more amateur films, but also collect home movies. And then there's also a video archive called Media Burn. And we collaborate in many different ways, but just to kind of give you that delineation of where do we fit into the ecosystem in Chicago, but also internationally. We are one of the only regional archives, in fact, one of the only archives that has a significant collection that focuses on the Black experience. And so though we don't exclusively focus on Black Chicagoans, because of the nature of the South Side, between the times that this medium was being shot, between the 1920s to the early 1980s, we're seeing the effects of the Great Migration. We're seeing racial segregation. We're seeing the ways in which that's being subverted. We're seeing fashion. We're seeing leisure. We're seeing the beginnings of the middle-class life in modern Chicago. And also many times we're also seeing some very historic scenes as well. So this project was founded by Professor Stewart for two main goals. To one, think of what do home movies have to offer as a visual culture outside of kind of theatrical film, as well as how do we talk about this complex history of Chicago. And so this is our port of entry, limited obviously by the objects and their ability to survive into today, and those who are willing to donate. But it is a window that allows us to have a greater portrait of certain aspects of Chicago history. And so on this screen, you'll see kind of how home movies were actually not only bought, but usually also, developed and processed and sent back to filmmakers, and then ultimately stored. So you're seeing some of the original canisters or boxes that home movies were actually kept in, and in ways in which we received our donations. Home movie, film itself is an organic matter and has several qualities which deteriorate over time. Along with the technology moving towards obsolescence, in the 80s, the ability to play back these films, many families have not had that for more than a generation, sometimes 2 or 3. And so though we are not truly in the definition that was laid out, a post-custodial archive, we do offer kind of post-custodial options. The first being that if you do decide that you want to become part of the archive, you can choose to donate your actual film materials so that we can keep them in a temperature-controlled vault, or you can actually just leave them on deposit until they are digitally transferred. And so that's one of the options that we were able to build into our deed of gift very early. But the films themselves will continue to decay. That's an irreversible process. The only thing we can do is slow it down through refrigeration. And this is just an example of how small these images are and compared to the theatrical gauge on the left. And we are very grateful that many of these films still have a lot of the information that they originally shot in. And so kind of accepting the challenge of this panel, how do we talk about how can an archive that's based at a university really engage in a post-custodial model? I'm here to say it already that we're always moving towards that, and we're never kind of accepting this is the only level in which we, the previous level in which we may have kind of made our agreements or built our digital infrastructure or whatever have you. We're always trying to move forward and learn from other partners, as well as from other archives, many of which presented today. But the ways in which we do kind of think of ourselves as a community engaged archive is using many of the same values that were emphasized earlier about building authentic relationships with our film donors, by honoring their subjectivity as filmmakers, and also the expertise of the community that these films represent, and to really showcase in the intention and care of these home movies in contexts that emphasize the social history of the South Side as well. And so I'm just going to speak a little bit about our processes and how that we try to put that into practice. So down to the gifting of films, we make our deed of gift is actually crafted currently in a way that outlines that when we make our digital transfer, the access copies that we create, the film donors have the same legal rights that we do in terms of sharing, displaying, or commercially using their footage. That is on equal terms, and it's something that we're trying to move forward even more further with by thinking about using things like the Creative Commons license structure. But right now it is very much on an equal basis of copyright. In terms of accessioning films, donors during the watch party process, which is sometimes 20, 30 years since anyone has seen these films, they have the right to decide what gets accessioned and what doesn't. And when we accession the films, we base the titling and the kind of core metadata based off of what we understand from the donors, as well as what was actually left on those objects themselves. We accept that this may be partial information, but that is actually, what we're engaging in. We're engaging in memory work, and so we have to honor that subjectivity as a part of that process. And so this is kind of the usual process of we will receive those films in whatever condition that they're in, we'll inventory them, and then go through a process of repair. We'll do a digital transfer. This is a very expensive process. If one was to do this today on their own, where it could cost up to 60 cents per foot, just the smallest films are 50 feet long, and that's only about 3 minutes. And usually most donations are about 15 to 20 films. And so you can see how this can get very expensive very quickly. And so we're able to offer this service for free to our home movie donors. We're also able to provide long-term digital preservation backup using the university's servers to do that. And ultimately, we're able to provide digital access. So not only, when we first started giving DVDs to the home movie donors, now we also have a digital catalog where the families can access them at any point, at any time. And also this becomes open to a larger community. It becomes a community asset. And for us to do that, we have to engage also in research and educational partnerships. And the first one we really consider a part of that is the oral history. So the oral histories help guide everything that goes on next from our item level description down to our film annotations, down to our finding aids. We rely on kind of the information we're gleaning through the session process, as well as these oral histories, to really dive into creating metadata that actually reflects the subjectivity of our filmmakers. So this is an example of an oral history that we did with Susan McKellen and her father, Ellis McKellen, before he passed, and I'm already over time, it seems. But this is some of the information which we were able to glean, which would not be found in any local subject headings, perhaps only maybe Jackson Park or the Chicago Raceway, but we're focusing our subject headings based off of the genres and the tropes that come up in our home movies. This is detailed more on our website, where you can see the annotations and also the subject headings as well. We continue to engage in educational partnerships with local high schools and local after-school programs, kind of exposing them to the materiality of film, as well as the ability to engage in their own and contribute to the research of the project as well. With our programming exhibition, we see our home movie donors again being partners in this with us. And so screenings of home movies are often, we always invite our donors to participate. Many of them take us up on that. We also believe it's important to compensate people for their time. And so we will pay home movie donors as an honorarium for being a part of that with us, those screenings. And this isn't a chance we see as to archive in public and to raise consciousness about these images. And so the locations that we choose are very specific to the South Side and are done in partnership with other activists, community centers, senior citizenship centers, so that it has greater community impact. This is a photo of an archiving workshop, which we participated in, where often personal and private collections come with more than home movies. And so they have questions about papers, about photographs, about slides. And so this is a workshop where we're offering our information and practicums on how to actually care for these materials. And this is the example of some of these more community engaged exhibitions. Some of these are at local neighborhood schools, as well as in other places inside the Academy. And in any place that we go, our home movie donors come with us as active participants. This was an exhibit that we actually recreated a mid-century living room. And a part of that programming was about themes such as like sisterhood, where we were able to bring together intergenerational groups of women, young women, older women who are actually represented in the films as young girls. And we were able to talk about how the image can be a form of self-representation in the past, and think about what it means today with social media, and also in ways in which sisterhood could be currently built across generations. Here's 5 of our donors at a recent public exhibition that we did, where this was actually a co-curatorial process with donors, with artists, with staff, to imagine a park that is going to be dedicated as an art salon for arts programming. And they played an integral role in that process as well. Often there's licensing requests for our films. We check in with our families to ask for approval to move forward with those, for those families that ask for that. And we also constantly do kind of creative reuse projects where we initiate programming with musicians and artists from Chicago to kind of reimagine home movies by exploring specific themes, particularly during the pandemic. I had a trailer, but I think I'll skip that so that we can save time for the panel. And I'll just lastly say that we just launched our new website, where you can see that not only holds our digital archive, but also holds these various ways in which portals in which we see home movies kind of taking shape through our work, and ways for the larger community and world to engage us. There's also particularly a section dedicated to our home movie donors called our home movie community. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Thank you so much, Samantha, for this opportunity, and everyone affiliated with UPenn and the fellow panelists. I look forward to the discussion portion of this as well.
Thank you so much, Justin. That was amazing. So now we're going to enter our roundtable discussion, and we're going to pose questions now to really kind of think through your process, because when we're thinking about collaborating with community and the different ways that methods of outreach, how do you allow people within your particular locations, communities know about your project and invite them in to participate in your archive?
And this is a question for me?
Well, everybody.
Oh, okay. I guess I can go first. So on our end, we are very much a initiative that is focused on reaching out to communities. So if there is a collection that is out there that our community would like for us to highlight and have us go ahead and talk about, we do. But outside of that, if a community or a community archivist does not, or at that time is just now starting to get their archive together, we ask if it's okay for us to talk about it, but if it's not okay, we don't talk about it. And so it's, again, more of a conversation of, can we share information? If not, then we don't share. And so it really is truly a conversation that we need to have with the people that we interact with, and whether or not they would like for us to share this wider knowledge to folks outside of either their community or their family or the institution, honestly.
And anyone else have any questions?
I would just say that, you know, from the very beginning, we knew that to collect is also means to exhibit. And so we constantly are involved in community projects and community initiatives. And that is the best way that the word gets out, is if we show up in our community with able to service some of their goals. So that's been our best calling card.
For SADA, I'll just say that, community participation is obviously fundamental to our organization's existence from the very beginning. And one aspect of our work I'd like to highlight are what we call participatory storytelling projects. Michelle and I have written about this, and the First Stage project in particular, but these are projects that we've initiated that open up the archive and allow community members to submit stories to us and materials to us directly. So the First Days project, as I mentioned, is a project that now includes about 550 stories from immigrants and refugees about their first experiences in the United States. We've had projects called the Road Trips Project. We have one called Letters from 6 Feet Away, which is documenting South Asian American experiences of the pandemic. And so these projects are one of the ways that we really open up the archive and the work that SADA does, and allow community members to see their own stories reflected in our work. And I'll add some links in the chat if anyone wants to check these projects out.
With the GOM archive, a lot of the materials that are in there were, collected decades ago at this point. But part of one of the really interesting and important pieces of the work that the GOM does is continued outreach and relationships to family members of the disappeared who are represented in the archive. And Carlos, I don't know if you want to say anything about outreach to victims' families.
Yeah, by this moment, we are trying to get closer to the families, but we have this it's been difficult about contact all the people in the testimonies, because maybe these people only went to GAM one time and then they disappear from the contacts of GAM. So what we are trying to do is to we are thinking making a campaign for the people to get closer to the archive, to get to know what kind of documents of their own are in the archive, and show them and try to tell them if they are agree to make it public, because that will be easier for us if we have the authorization from the families. If we don't have the authorization, we are not going to make it public, because it is really, really important for us to protect the families of the victims.
Oh, thank you. And so actually, for those in the audience, if you wish to drop your own questions into the chat, please feel free to do so, and then I'll read them out to the panel. So right now I have one question here. It's for Jessica. Are there community archives known by and accessible to scholars, lawmakers, and the general public? Prioritize the community histories is from, of course, but I'm wondering how those who might deny this history might be shown that it exists.
Yeah, we have a really great community archive that has been in existence since 1970 at ASU Library. It's called the Chicana Research Collection. And that was a collection that was started by Dr. Christine Marine, who was a faculty and student at ASU, and so she was really interested in documenting her own community. She was from a mining and farming town, and so she started an archive at ASU that has been in existence since 1970, and that one is available on our digital repository. And some of the archival materials that is not digitized, you can request to come and see it at our Würzburger Reading Room on our Tempe campus. So there is some accessibility to community archives. I will say that, again, we are in the very initial stages of doing a lot of community archives just in general at ASU. Very much a lot of the archives that are available at ASU are very institutional or very white centric. And so it really depends on the material, and kind of you have to dig in and find this material. It's not truly kind of like, hey, we have a whole collection of community archive. It's just kind of like, here's a piece, here's a piece, here's some piece. But the Chicano Research Collection at ASU is probably one of the most prominent community archive that we have available and accessible to researchers. And outside of that, again, if people do donate to ASU, we do make that material available to researchers. But again, if people don't want folks to either be in their family archive or have accessibility to their community archive, we do not direct people without explicit permission from the organization or from the family to go ahead and reach out to them or to reach out to others in order to have access to those materials. It just really depends on the express permission from people who do that particular work.
Thank you. I have another question. This is for many people on the panel, from Sarah. She says, it's great to see these examples of post-custodial and post-custodial archives and archiving. My question is about the sustainability of funds for these projects and initiatives. For the digital records at Hackerford, in SADA, and with Southside Home Movies Project, what mechanisms are in place to ensure the continued accessibility of the digital material, thinking about the long-term digital storage, affinity, tech migrations, etc. These projects seem somewhat precarious due to grant funding, staff turnover, and the like. Along the lines I'm thinking about, disparity that will increase, put community archives under the threat of climate crisis across the globe worsen, and that resources become more scarce. It feels somewhat inevitable due to our current trajectory that one of the most well-funded orgs and collections will have a chance of surviving climate catastrophes. And then she apologizes for the bleak tones of the questions. But to follow up on that, that's another question that I have too. Like, how do you, like, what type of, basically, what are the best approaches for working with community archives and thinking about sustainability? Like, you know, how do you put those methods in place, and or how do you think about processes to kind of go around those obstacles when they occur? And again, this is all the answer. It's not like a definite answer. It's just like, these are things that we're thinking about, you know what I mean? So.
I'm happy to share about SADA. You know, SADA is an independent community-based institution, and it's an organization, you know, that I helped to found 13 years ago. And when we started the organization, and once again, Michelle and I have written about this, and I think Burgess Jules, for those who are not familiar with Burgess's work, really recommend the work that he's done thinking about sustainability, particularly of community-based archives, so independent community-based archives. And a forum that we had 3 years ago that Burgess and Shift Collective organized called Architecting Sustainable Futures, thinking about the long-term sustainability of community-based archives. And I'll add a link to the report after I'm done sharing, just so you can read more about that, because there's some recommendations there that I think are really worth noting. For SADA, you know, when we first started the organization, like many archives, we thought that we would turn to the typical funding sources, grants, for support for our work. And we got some pretty harsh rejections in those early days for SADA. And the rejections also, like, you know, the reviewers' comments would also talk about this is like a niche community, these archives are not sustainable. Why should we invest our resources in this work? And so instead we turn to our community for support. And I'm really proud that over the last 13 years, SADA has been primarily funded and supported by our community itself. And I think that is the most sustainable kind of support that there is. And I'm also really proud of the fact that SADA is an independent organization. Our responsiveness, our work is directed to our community and exists because of our community's support for what we do. Along the way, grant funders have begun to understand the vision and the long-term, the long-term vision for the work that we've been doing. And I'm really proud that the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation recently made a $1 million investment in SADA to help us create a more sustainable and adaptable organization for the long term. So I'll add a link to that as well in the chat if anyone wants to read more about that. But really, like all of us need to be doing, thinking about the long term. And from the very beginning, of starting the organization, our vision was to create an institution that would outlast all of us. And that's really what I'm hoping that we're doing.
Also, I'll open up the question to you, Sean. If someone else has a question, they want to raise their hand, that's fine. You can unmute if you wish to speak instead of put your question in the chat.
Thank you, Samantha, and thanks to the panel for such a rich set of presentations. I have like 3 questions that are actually, I think, one. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit more about the importance of ensuring genuine power sharing, ensuring that genuine power sharing defines institutional community partnerships. What are some specific challenges that you may have encountered in maintaining that equity balance, and how did you navigate them? And then for Samip, as SADA becomes larger and, dare I say, more institutional in nature, I wonder if you're encountering any of these same kinds of tensions that a university might experience in doing this work. Thank you.
I'll try to take a little bit of that on. Kind of this has been something that we're, been positioned inside a university as a faculty research project, had to be mindful of. It's, many of our projects initiatives before we really launched them, we, even like our new website design, we did like a 3-month co-collaborative design process that centered a group of our home movie donors, as well as community-based artists, to help us guide us in the decisions and choices that we're making. Not only around the features and tools, but also about the self-expression of the site itself. I would say that that's something where the onus has to be on us to continue to put that into process, no matter how the archive continues to develop or change, or staff comes on or leaves, is like to have that mission truly be lived out. We have to practice it around these core decisions, around initiatives that we make. Even our Spinning Home Movies was a pandemic, kind of creation, but it only made sense if our donors were on board, So that was the biggest kind of creative reuse project that we had taken on, where we had moved from showing feature, kind of the full-length films in a public setting to kind of these creative, projects, compilations. And so their feedback in that process was important before we moved forward any further with it. So I at least offer that. I imagine there's other ways to kind of keep ourselves accountable.
I'll just briefly say that one of the things I think that, and Carlos, you can agree or disagree, but I think one of the things that has helped with the balance in the relationship between the GOM and Haverford is the kind of the sharing of knowledge and expertise and capacity building, so that the academic institution isn't the holder of all the technical knowledge, or the only entity capable of making direct changes, adding things, giving permissions and access. So I think that's a really important part of it too, is this kind of two-way street or double flow of knowledge and training and expertise for both parts of the partnership.
Yeah, I'll also echo what Brie said. It definitely is a two-way partnership, and that is how we sustain a lot of this particular work. And I will say on our end, it has been a fight here at ASU Library in order for us to even do this type of work. As I stated, Nancy Godoy, who is the main person who started this initiative, she fought for a number of years in order to get this particular work going. And I truly, honestly think that if it wasn't for her receiving the Mellon grant when she did, she would probably still be in this fight here at ASU Library for the work that we're trying to do. And because our initiative has been so successful and we've been able to branch out and have these creative partnerships, not just with our community, but with other institutions, it has shown our administration and our leadership that this is an initiative that is worthwhile for them to invest in. And I truly do believe that if it, and this is just particular to Arizona and to ASU, if it was not for the civil unrest and the things that happened in 2020, where the Black community was concerned, I don't think that I would be here. I don't think that this collection would be started. And so there really is a groundswelling of community support that really has propelled us into the next level of the work that we're trying to do here at Arizona State University. And it is a two-way street and two-way partnership with the people and the communities.
John, would you like to ask your question?
Sure, thank you so much. Thank you and congratulations, everybody. It's so fascinating and beautifully presented, amazing projects. Those were some profound reflections just now from all of you on the power of community, but the power of, let's say, institutionalized capital to still shape so many aspects of what you all are doing. And that is a complicated dance that you are dancing. I wanted, though, perhaps in a, which I'll try to frame as a question, to turn back to another thread that I found fascinating. I'll start it with Carlos and Brie's presentation, where you raised this important topic of private and public, and your powerful decision, necessary decision to keep so much material essentially private. I guess I'll put that words in quotations. And I wondered if you could all perhaps offer some reflections on the private and the public as it figures into your thinking about your projects. I mean, I think we all sort of understand the notion that that family-based archives or personal materials often contain things of a private nature, but I suspect the archival theory of once things end up in an institutional context, those are mainly open. But you're all suggesting that there are different categories and concepts of privacy and protection that need to be factored into your work. I also am thinking that to some extent you're nuancing what we might call the open access movement, which is this mantra that we're all, I think, used to hearing so much. And I just wondered if you'd like to offer any sort of suggestions or examples or challenges or about how you think about making public or making private. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I would like to share the experience of GAM. Right now, what we are doing is that if there is people interested in having full access to the collection, they need to sign a commitment and an agreement of confidentiality. And if they are using the information and they are going to write and public anything, we need to make a control of what are they going to publish. So there is definitely our desire is to make it everything public, but we can do it if we don't have the authorization from the families. But in this way, we can have a control of what people are going to use and what are they are going to be broadcasting to the different ways they are going to do it. And that is because in this type of collections, we are, you can read testimonies about sexual crimes and human rights violations and crimes against humanity. So it is really, really delicate how to save this information, but also it is important for us to make it public and to people get to know what happened in Guatemala. So one of our experiences is that we are trying to transform these testimonies and this material into social media materials. And we are trying to get closer to our users of our social media channels by using the information and transforming it into social media materials that can be more sensitive about the information. And that way you can get closer even to the young ones in Guatemala, the new generations that still don't know what happened, and they are only receiving information about, oh, this was because there was a Cold War, and there are many groups interested to say that this type of topics are the ones that don't let us to have a human development in the country. And this type of thinking, we are trying to get closer to the information by using the materials and making it closer to the users and to the new generations.
This is a really interesting question, and one that I certainly think about a lot as well. I think, you know, for our organization, and I would say for most community-based archives, that's why the ongoing relationships with our community members are so important, that the relationship doesn't end when the materials have been accessioned or added to the archive. That relationship continues beyond that process. And that has implications for how then those stories, when they are made public, impact our community members. And I think that allows us also to be in tune with that impact. So I'll just share a couple of specific stories or anecdotes or examples of that. One is I added a link in the chat to the First Days Project, where we collect and share stories from immigrants and refugees about their first experiences in the country. And like I said, there's about 550 or so stories right now. Those are stories that are often submitted by community members themselves or by their children, interviewing their parents or other relatives or friends, community members, neighbors. And occasionally we'll get requests from people to ask that their story be removed from the First Days Project website. We do that immediately and without question. But some of the examples or reasons that people have provided to us are, for example, that they're going through a job interview process. They don't want their interview to be the first thing that's Googled or that comes up when their name is Googled, or that they're going through the immigration process. They're worried about the implications that it might have for their status. And so, you know, that ongoing, that openness, that transparency, and that willingness to let the storyteller be the one who determines how that story is shared, essential to the approach that we take. Yeah, we have rights agreements signed, and yeah, perhaps legally we have a right to make that interview available online. But if that is making a community member vulnerable, putting them in harm's way, or they just don't want it out there anymore, we always follow their lead and always respect their wishes. And I think that ongoing relationship is really important. I want to share another story that I think is just interesting from my perspective and maybe relevant to the question you asked, John, about I shared the newspaper clipping of Kala Bagay. She was one of the few South Asian women in the country in the early 1900s. She arrived in San Francisco in 1915. And her family was basically allowed to enter the country because they were wealthy, they had financial means. And so she arrived here with her husband and their 3 sons. And initially they had settled to move into Berkeley. They'd purchased a home there. But when they arrived in Berkeley, they were basically not allowed to enter their home by their neighbors who didn't want a South Asian family, a brown family in their neighborhood. Ended up moving to San Francisco. And their family story is one of incredible tragedy. I mean, Kala's husband basically took his own life in 1928. He was denaturalized after that Supreme Court decision and took his own life. So then it's his daughter and Kalabagai's granddaughter, Rani, who donated those materials to SADA and has been a very close friend and supporter of the organization for many years. A couple of years ago, some activists and organizers in Berkeley, where the Bagais first tried to move, began petitioning City Council in Berkeley to rename a street in Berkeley in honor of Kalabagai, recognizing the histories of exclusion that Berkeley, a city that most of us think of being very progressive, also has. And last year, City Council approved the renaming of a street in downtown Berkeley in honor of Kalabagai. There's a Kalabagai Way now in Berkeley, and if you go there, you'll see her name and photographs and banners with her history hanging there. But it's actually been really interesting that now this woman who for many, many years was not a public figure has suddenly become a public figure. And so the relationship, once again, with her granddaughter has given insight into what that means for someone's grandmother to now suddenly be a street name and a public figure that's hanging around Berkeley. For example, over the summer, the Downtown Association wanted to have like a Kalabagai food festival or something. And it was uncomfortable for her to imagine her grandmother's name being used in that way. And so ultimately we decided to say no and to not allow that to happen. But, I think it's really interesting to think about, and I often think about it myself. How would I feel if my family story was out there? As much as I ask people to share their stories publicly, it's not something that I always am doing. So I think it's a really interesting tension, but that only the relationships with our community allow us to fully be part of. And that's why I think community archives and community-based archives are so powerful.
Thank you for that. So we're a bit over time, but we all really appreciate your participation and the time you've taken to share the stories and experiences and knowledge in creating post-custodial collections and community archives, and also why they're so important, and especially to people to learn and know about the stories of people who are underrepresented in archive collections, and the empowerment that happens when you create those stories and create those collections in order for people to learn and research and engage in the stories of people who've contributed to our history. So thank you, everyone, for being with us today. I'd like to thank the panels, like everyone, all the panelists who shared their stories today and shared their projects today. That was really amazing. Also, I'd like to thank all of my colleagues here at the Kislak Center for all of their hard work to put this symposium together. And lastly, I'd like to thank you, our audience, and who have joined us to ask questions, to learn and engage in these ethical questions that we all participate in while we're doing this work. So I'd like to say to you all, have a really good evening and have an excellent weekend. And thank you so much for joining us today.